Module 4, Objective 8, describe the mechanism responsible for tension production in a muscle fiber and compare the different types of muscle contraction. As a whole, a muscle fiber is either contracted or relaxed. We refer to that as the all or none principle. And what this states is that a particular muscle fiber is never going to be half contracted and half of it relaxed. As the action potential travels along the sarcolemma and down the T-tubules, the entire muscle fiber acts as one unit. So it's the all or none principle. The amount of tension that a single muscle fiber can produce depends on three factors. One, the number of cross bridges that are formed. Again, if you think of cross bridges as sort of like a tug of war, the number of people that you have on each team is going to determine the amount of tension that this rope will experience. So the number of pivoting cross bridges is going to factor into the amount of tension that a single muscle fiber can produce. The second factor is the resting length of the muscle fiber at the time of stimulation, and I'm going to show you a graph in just a minute that will help explain that. Thirdly, the frequency of stimulation. How frequently is that muscle fiber being stimulated? That's going to play a factor, a role as well. In terms of the length, the tension produced by a muscle fiber relates to the length of the sarcomere. And the amount of tension produced depends not only on the number of cross bridges that are formed, but also the amount of overlap between the thick and thin filaments. There is a maximum tension produced when the maximum number of cross bridges is formed. So again, if you have your tug of war scenario, the more people you have, the maximum amount of people you have will produce the maximum tension. In reality, in the skeletal muscle fiber, this occurs when the zone of overlap is the largest. If we look at a graph here, let's sort of orient ourselves. We have tension on the y-axis, all right, so percent of maximum, where 100% of the tension is reached all the way up here. And then we're going to have the optimal, or the resting length down here on the x. And we have little snapshots in these photos, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if we look at 1 and 5, we see that these snapshots come from these extremes of the graph. And how much tension is produced? Well, if you follow those over to the y-axis, we can see that it's 0. Well, why is there 0 tension produced in the case of 5? Well, the answer is there's no overlap. The actin and myosin molecules, they don't overlap, so they cannot form cross bridges. So it's almost like your tug of war, here's your rope, and your people are all the way back here. They're nowhere near the rope, so they cannot produce tension. This occurs if a muscle is stretched, or skeletal muscle fiber is stretched. Now, normally, we have mechanisms in place to prevent our muscles from being stretched at this point. But in the lab, we can stretch a muscle fiber to where there is 0 overlap, and with 0 overlap, you're going to get 0 tension. At the other end of the spectrum over here with number 1, we see that there's too much overlap. Even if cross bridges can be formed, there's really nowhere for that pull to occur, so you get, again, 0 tension. So too much overlap, not enough overlap, or 0 overlap in the case of 5, reduces the tension. 2 and 4 are just extremes, slightly less extreme than 1 and 5. In the case of 4, you have minimal overlap, so you get a little bit of tension, but not much. And in the case of 2, again, you have too much overlap. You can get a little tension, but not very much. The maximum tension is produced when the zone of overlap is large, but the thin filaments do not extend across the center of the sarcomere. And that is referred to as the optimal resting length. In addition to the optimal optimal resting length, we have the normal range, which is identified there. The frequency of stimulation. A single neural stimulation produces a single contraction called a twitch, and twitches last between 7 and 100 milliseconds in length. In order to have sustained muscular contractions, we have to have repeated stimuli, repeated neural stimulation, or action potentials. A single twitch has 3 phases: a latent period, a contraction phase, and a relaxation phase. And I'm going to jump to an image. It may be a bit easier to follow, but we can see down here, here's your latent period or phase, your contraction phase, and then the relaxation phase. And we can see from this graph that tension is produced during the contraction phase, and then it slowly drops off during the relaxation phase. But there's no tension during the latent period. And we're going to jump back a slide to all the verbiage to sort of try to make sense of this. So we're going to start the stimulus at time 0, and we see that it takes several seconds, maybe 2 to 3 milliseconds in this case, 2 to 3 milliseconds in order before any tension is produced. So let's try to understand why we don't get any tension as soon as the stimulus reaches the skeletal muscle fibers. So during the latent period, you get the action potential moving across the sarcolemma. Okay, so if we were to draw that sort of rudimentary skeletal muscle fiber, the action potential moves across the sarcolemma down the T-tubule, releasing the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The calcium diffuses, it binds troponin, and only then can you actually have contraction. So that 2 to 3 millisecond delay during the latent period accounts for all of that. The action potential moving down the sarcolemma, down the T-tubule, releasing the calcium diffusing out into the cytoplasm, or sarcoplasm as it is, binding troponin. That is the latent period. Contraction begins when calcium binds the troponin and the cross bridge forms. So you start to develop tension as those cross bridges undergo power strokes. Relaxation occurs when the calcium levels fall in the cytosol. Why are they falling? Because they're being pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The cross bridges detach, and your tension is going to slowly decrease until you're back to 0. So that is what happens during a twitch. And again, twitch is defined as a single muscle contraction, skeletal muscle fiber contraction, from a single stimulus. If you were to experiment with muscle fibers, and this is exactly what had happened, scientists had teased out individual muscle fibers, and they started to experiment. Well, what happens if we repeatedly stimulate a single muscle fiber? And when they took a single muscle fiber and they stimulated it repetitively over and over and over again, this is the resulting graph that came from that. So let's try to make sense of this graph. What we see are these little peaks, okay? So we see these little bumps, or humps, if you will, and each one of those humps represent a twitch. So it is a single muscle fiber contraction from a single stimulus. And if you follow this graph, we can see that you get a muscle contraction, you get a twitch, followed by a second twitch, a third twitch, a fourth twitch, so on and so forth. And the one thing that you should note is that for each successive twitch, the amount of tension that that twitch is producing is getting just a little bit higher each time. In fact, they're going to get higher until they reach some type of plateau. And we can see that here, the last three, you do not get any higher. So we call this Treppie, which is German for stair step, because it sort of looked like stairs, as with each excessive stimulus producing just a little bit more tension. So it's a stair-step increase in tension, and it's caused by the repeat stimulations immediately after the relaxation phase. So as soon as the skeletal muscle fiber relaxed, you zapped it again with another stimulation, and it led to this pattern that we found. Treppie is very common in cardiac muscle and the heart. It's not common in skeletal muscle. But the way we can explain this is, again, kind of understanding the microphysiology that occurs. Let's look at our first little twitch, and we know that when that twitch occurs, you get a stimulus. You have 2 to 3 milliseconds delay, which is the latent phase. Then you get a contraction phase as the calcium concentration builds. And then as the calcium drops, you get the relaxation phase, and that's the twitch. Well, before 100% of the calcium can be pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, you get the second stimulus. And the second stimulus is going to produce a slightly stronger tension. And the slightly stronger tension is due, it's believed anyway, to be due to a little extra calcium. The calcium was not 100% pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum after the first twitch, so you have a little bit extra for the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. It's until you reach a plateau that you can no longer produce tension, and we call that the maximum tension. Okay, so that is Treppie. Scientists were intrigued by that pattern, and they thought, okay, well, let's try to stimulate the skeletal muscle fiber before it's allowed to relax. So if you look at this graph, you can see here this stimulation occurred before this particular skeletal muscle fiber was allowed to relax. So the repetition was very frequent. It was more frequent than the last. You did not allow for relaxation. Going back, Treppie allowed each twitch to relax all the way before the second stimulation and third and fourth was initiated. But with this, relaxation was halted. It was stopped. Before relaxation could be realized, a second stimulus occurred. And if you did this over time, you ended up with this pattern of graph. And you can see that the tension that is produced by this is greater. And we call this wave summation, because we are summing up all of the individual waves, not allowing for a complete relaxation. And you're able to get more. And again, it's the same explanation that we've seen before. The amount of calcium left in the cytoplasm or the sarcoplasm in between successive twitches increases. So you have just a little bit more calcium with each, and that's going to cause basically more troponins to be bound, more cross bridges to be formed, and a greater tension to be produced. If you allowed wave summation to go over time, you get incomplete tetany. Incomplete tetanus, we can see the wave summation here. If you allow that to go, you get incomplete tetanus. Muscles produce near maximum tension due to these rapid cycles of contraction and relaxation without full relaxation ever being realized. Complete tetany is when the stimulation is so quick that you eliminate the relaxation phase completely. So there's zero relaxation. The muscle is in a continuous state of contraction. All potential cross bridges are formed. You get this maximum tension production. The downside is it doesn't last very long. You cannot sustain muscle contraction for a great length of time. You will eventually either run out of ATP, run out of calcium, or say the heck with it and stop the neural stimulation. So complete tetanus, very strong, but it cannot be sustained for very long. Tension production in individual skeletal muscle fibers is great, but it's not how we operate. We operate with whole skeletal muscles. So let's sort of switch our focus from individual skeletal muscle fibers to whole muscles. And the tension that an entire skeletal muscle can produce depends on the number of stimulated muscle fibers that are contracting. For this, we have to sort of define motor unit. And a motor unit is a single neuron, a motor neuron, and all of the muscle fibers that it controls. Motor units may contain a few muscle fibers or up to thousands, depending on where it's at in the body. But all the fibers in a motor unit are going to contract at the same time. Recruitment is how this occurs. And I'm going to come back to this slide, but I'd like to jump to this image to sort of give you a visual. Here we have 3 motor units coming out of the spinal cord, and they're color coordinated. We have red, blue, and purple. So 3 motor units, and they're going to come down and they're going to synapse with this muscle. And you can see that each of these motor units are going to synapse with individual skeletal muscle fibers. So all of the blue skeletal muscle fibers here, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're all controlled by this blue motor neuron. And all of the red skeletal muscle fibers are controlled by the red motor neuron, and then likewise the purple are controlled by the purple motor neuron. So we have motor units 1, 2, and 3, and remember a motor unit, again, is nothing more than a single motor neuron and all the muscle fibers that it synapses with. So this is what we have in our muscle. And motor units are great for alternating. It's sort of like a relay. So let's say you want to pick up a book, your textbook, and you want to hold it up. You hold it up. Do you use your entire biceps brachii to flex at that elbow and hold that book up? Well, of course not. You would likely throw it behind your head and send it sailing. Instead, we utilize motor units. So we're going to start with the red motor unit, and we can see the red motor unit is going to pick that book up and it's going to hold it. And as it starts to fatigue, as it starts to run out of ATP, as it starts to run out of calcium concentration, motor unit 2 is going to pick up the slack, and it's going to sustain that muscle contraction, holding up that book. And it's going to give motor unit 1, the red motor unit, time to rest, time to rehabilitate. It's time to generate its more ATP and get everything back to rest. And as motor 2 is holding that textbook, it's going to start fatiguing, and motor unit 3 is going to then pick up the slack, and it's going to continue. And this relay, just like a relay race where everybody has a small part, is going to be able to maintain muscle contraction over a longer period of time than if you were to use all motor units at the same time to lift that textbook. So this is how we sort of trade off. We have, when we see something like a textbook laying on a counter, we have some idea of what it takes to lift it. And we can then utilize motor units in order to counter the weight of that book. I'm sure we've all seen something and went to pick it up only to realize it was a lot heavier than we anticipated, or even a lot lighter. You know, you go to pick up something and it's a lot lighter than what you anticipated, and there's this very, quick, gross movement where you just didn't expect that. And that's because we underestimated the motor units, how many motor units were needed, and we may have overdid it. Or in the case of something being heavier than anticipated, we underdid it. But motor units are the way to go because they really allow for sustained muscle contraction over time through this relay system that allows individual motor units to rest. So we do this through recruitment, and that's an increase in the number of active motor units that are being used. It's going to produce a smooth, steady increase in tension where the maximum tension is achieved when all the motor units reach complete tetanus. If complete tetanus is reached, it can only be sustained for a very short amount of time. Sustained contractions produce less than the maximum tension because individual motor units are functioning, but we can do that over a longer period of time because of the rotation and the rest that motor units can undergo as you rotate from one motor unit to the next. Okay. So sustained tension is less than maximum, but it allows units to rest through rotation. The next concept is muscle tone. The muscle tone is defined as the normal tension and firmness of a muscle at rest. When we say somebody is toned, what do we mean? Well, it means that their muscles are well defined, their muscles are bulging. And muscle tone is basically when a muscle has at least a few or one motor unit always active. And because that motor unit is causing that muscle to contract ever so slightly, it leads to the bulge, which leads to the muscular definition. So we constantly have, in our muscles, our skeletal muscles, we constantly have a state of tone. And of course, we can increase our muscle tone through lots of aerobic activities, okay? The great thing about muscle is it burns energy 24/7. And a lot of that energy is burnt at rest through muscle tone. So even at rest, we have motor units rather, contracting, and that's going to be utilizing ATP, and that's going to burn calories. So we are constantly burning with increased muscle mass. One of the weight loss strategies is to increase your muscle mass, because the more muscle tissue, the more tone, and the more tone, the more energy you're burning 24/7. I always like to say, you know, your fat sleeps when you sleep, but muscle is going to burn 24/7. There are two types of muscle contractions, isometric and isotonic. Isometric, if we were to take that word, iso means same, metric refers to measurement. This is a muscle contraction that does not change the measurement of the muscle or the length of the muscle. And this occurs when the resistance or the weight that that muscle is trying to lift is too much. It's more than the muscle can physically lift. So if I were to tell you to walk over and push down the wall, you could go over to the wall, you could contract your muscles, but you would not be successful in pushing it down. So that would be an isometric contraction. Isotonic is when the skeletal muscle physically changes length, and that's going to result in motion. So you actually get a movement. And that only occurs when the resistance or the weight is less than what that muscle can lift. So isometric contractions versus isotonic contractions. Once a muscle is contracted, it then relaxes. And in order to return to the resting length, there are three forces that assist. One is the elastic forces. We know that at the ends of muscles we have tendons, and tendons are made up of connective tissues and fibers that are elastic in nature. So when a muscle is contracted, in order to return it to the resting length, those elastic forces, just like pulling a rubber band, as soon as the tension is released, the rubber band snaps back to rest. And that's exactly what's happening in our muscles. The second factor that helps return a muscle to resting length is the opposing muscle contractions. So right now, if you were all to contract the biceps and cause a flexion at the elbow, you can quickly return the biceps to resting length by simply contracting the triceps brachii muscle, which is a muscle on the bottom of the arm, if you will. So opposing muscles that oppose one another, the triceps and biceps are great examples of opposing muscles. One flexes, the other extends. They have opposite actions. Lastly, gravity. When you contracted the biceps and you decide to release that contraction, gravity is going to help pull everything towards the center of the earth, which is going to return that muscle to its resting length. So 3 factors that help return a muscle to resting length during relaxation.